Good morning to you, dear friends. My name is Susan Haney, and I'm here today with another Wednesday edition of contemplative prayer or contemplative spirituality, if you will. Today I'm going to talk about two different spiritual disciplines. They are silence and solitude. Now, remember, a discipline is not necessarily a punishment. Discipline is simply learning, and a spiritual discipline is a practice that helps us learn God better, that brings us into God's presence. If you saw my little teaser yesterday, I gave you a definition of silence. I'm going to read it to you again now. And silence is closing off our souls from sounds, whether noise, music, or words, so that we may better still the inner chatter and clatter of our noisy hearts and be increasingly attentive to God. I like that. Still the inner chatter and clatter, and that is oftentimes the hardest thing any of us does, is to still and shut down what's going on inside. All right, so solitude is very much akin to that. In fact, they are so closely related that many scholars and those who write about spirituality include them together. Richard Foster wrote Celebration of Discipline in 1978. And he says specifically in his chapter that he's titled Solitude that he couldn't decide if he's going to call it solitude or silence. So what is solitude? All right, here's the definition from my Bible. And I told you yesterday it is the Life with God Bible. Solitude is the creation of an open, empty space in our lives by purposefully abstaining from interaction with other human beings, so that freed from competing loyalties, we can be found by God. So silence allows us to be attentive, and solitude allows us to be found. I think those are really, really very important concepts to have. Now, I want to illustrate silence and solitude with a Bible story. This story comes from 1 Kings chapter 19. And I hope that sometime later today you will pick up your Bible and you'll actually read 1 Kings 18 and 19. I'm not going to tell you the whole story because it's a little long and you'll want to get the whole thing. All right, so this story is about the prophet Elijah. He was a prophet in Israel, and he came about after Solomon's reign. In fact, the king of Israel, which was the northern kingdom at that time, was King Ahab, and his wife was Jezebel, and you've probably heard about her. Jezebel was a Canaanite princess, and she supported the prophets of Baal, as in she fed them, and she made sure that they had what they needed. She was their patron. There was a drought. There was a big contest between Elijah, the one prophet of God, and the prophets of Baal, and there were several hundred of those. I want to say 800, but don't quote me on that. You can read it in the Bible yourself. So there was this contest, and Elijah won. And as so often happens when you've had a great big success, something always happens to make you hit rock bottom again, right? Well, Jezebel was really angry over this, and she threatened to kill Elijah, and he was afraid. He really did hit rock bottom. And you know what? You can be critical of Elijah, but she was the queen, and she probably had the wherewithal to make sure he was dead if she wanted him dead. And he ran. I mean, literally ran until he couldn't run anymore. And he found himself under a broom tree. And that is where God came and found him, in solitude and in silence. God allowed him to rest there in the shade, brought him water. Well, it says the angel of God, whatever. He had water and he had food, and he was able to rest for a while. And then God brought him some more water and food and said, you're going to need to eat because we've got a ways to go. And he took Elijah into the wilderness, through the desert, 40 days and 40 nights worth of desert, to Sinai, to Mount Sinai. Kings calls it Mount Horeb, it's the same thing. Yep, it's the place where Moses got the 10 Commandments. It's a holy, holy site to the people of Israel. So he goes there, but God does not choose to talk to him at all at that point. He finds a cave. He spends some time in the cave until finally God comes to him and says, okay, Elijah, I want you to stand at the mouth of the cave because I'm going to come by. That reminds me of Moses a lot too. So Elijah stands there in the cave and the mouth of the cave, and there's a tremendous windstorm. This is stronger than any tornado or hurricane that I've ever heard about because it talks about the rocks being broken apart by the wind. That's pretty incredible. But God wasn't in the storm. And then there's an earthquake, but you know what? God's not in the earthquake either. Then there's fire, and God's not in the fire either. And this is significant because in the ancient world, gods were equated with wind and earthquake and fire, but the God of Israel wasn't there. And you know what the King James Version says next. King James Version said, and then there was a still small voice. I use the New Revised Standard Version when I am studying, and it really struck me because they translate those words as sheer silence. It's not specific, it's not spelled out in words, but we can infer that there was God in the stillness and in the silence and in the aloneness of the wilderness. Yes, if you want to find God, if you're being drawn to God and to know God in new ways, to experience God more fully, then you're going to have to go to God in silence and in solitude. And they're not easy at all. Let's see. I was going to read this to you too. Okay, spiritual disciplines are things that we do. Yeah, they are. That's not it. Okay, so sometimes I do my working ahead and I'm just not quite ready. And this is today. Here it is. We must understand the connection between inner solitude and inner silence. They are inseparable. All the masters of the interior life speak of the two in the same breath. This is Richard Foster, and he quotes The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, which is a great classic of the faith, which I can recommend to you to read. Without silence, there is no solitude. And without silence and solitude, your attempts to know God will be challenged. Join me next week, and we'll talk about some techniques, if you will, that help me to go into that silence and to get rid of that chatter and clatter from my heart. I hope you have a great week. I hope that if you're available, you will be at the First Baptist Church of Gastonia this week. We're having a very special child-focused service on storytelling. And we may be doing even a little bit of contemplative type praying during that service as well. And we will continue to do that moving forward through the next few months. I hope you'll join me again next Wednesday. If you have friends who aren't on Facebook, I'll get this video uploaded to my YouTube channel later on this afternoon. And that YouTube channel is Susan Haney 890. Again, have a great day, and I'll see you next week. Thanks a lot for joining me. Bye-bye.